All right, guys, so for tonight's video, we've got another airboat here in the shop, and this is going to involve a stainless steel project. I'll show you guys what the customer wants. All right, so here we are at the front of the boat, and this plate is sandwiched through the front of the boat. There's a cross member here. So we've got 6 stainless steel bolts that sandwich through a cross member. This little hook right here is what he uses to strap the boat down on the front. The customer got a hold of me and they asked if I would come up with some sort of a system to where we could attach a winch to the front of the boat using this plate. So as we talked about it and brainstormed, I'm going to scarf this piece of rod off that he uses for the hook, and I'll clean it up. I've got a piece of, I believe it's 1/2-inch plate, and then I've got a piece of 2.5-inch square tube and a piece of 2-inch square tube. So I'm basically going to build a receiver hitch that mounts on the front of this boat to this plate, and I'm not going to pull the plate off. I'm actually just going to weld it where it is. We discussed it. There's nothing underneath there that I can screw up. Nothing that I can get too hot. The cross member is aluminum. There's not like plastic or cardboard or anything like that. Wood, nothing like that that can start on fire. So feel pretty good about that. We'll just cut this piece of rod off, clean it up, and then we'll start building our receiver hitch. I'm going to take the piece of 2.5-inch tube and weld it right to this plate. I want to keep the winch as low as possible. The higher up you go, the weaker it's going to be. And you're pulling quite a bit of weight here. So I want to keep the tube as low as possible, and I'm going to make my welds as long as possible to give it as much strength as possible. Once I get that welded on, I'm going to build a mounting plate for our winch. So we'll walk over and I'll show you what the winch looks like and what I'm thinking as far as a mounting plate goes. All right, so the customer spared no expense. They've got a worn 2,000-pound winch here. And the customer likes to hunt by himself sometimes, and he knows that it's only a matter of time before he ends up getting stuck. And if he does get stuck, he wants to be able to drive a rod down in the mud and hook onto it and pull himself out. So this is kind of a safety feature for him on his airboat. So the winch comes with a plate. So here's what the bottom plate looks like. So the winch is going to sit like this, but we are going to mount this plate to our mounting plate, and we'll be able to do it through these 2 holes. So we're going to run 2 bolts through our mounting plate, and we do have a piece of 1/2-inch plate here. So we're going to take that plate and build us a mounting plate that will weld to our piece of receiver tube here. And yes, you're reading that right. They wanted $46 for this little bitty piece. So that's nice. So I'm going to mount the plate to this. I'm going to keep it as short as I can while still allowing us to slide it in to the full length that's welded to the plate on the boat. We'll have our 5/8 hole on the side so we can run a pin through it. That way when he's not using it, he can pull the pin, pull it out, store it underneath the seat in his boat, and it's not out there in the weather and in the way. The other thing we're going to do, since we're cutting the rod off the front, which is what he uses to hook his winch cable to on his boat trailer, the other thing we need to do is we need to take and burn a pick and eye so that we can weld it to the top of our 2.5-inch square tube so that he still has somewhere that he can hook his winch to on the boat trailer. To start out, I'm going to start cutting off the rod. I believe I'm just going to use a zip disc, and then I'll use a flap disc to just clean up the welds and the material that's left there. We'll go ahead and wipe everything down. It's pretty muddy because he's been hunting with it. So we'll go ahead and get that prepped up, and then we'll start looking at what we want to do with our tube. So let's go over there and start cutting that off. Okay, so here's what we're working with. So we're gonna take this plate and I'm gonna weld that piece of receiver hitch here. That's gonna give us about 3/8 of an inch clearance back here so that I can slide my hitch in that's holding the winch. I don't think I wanna go any longer than the mounting plate. I think I want it to be the exact same size or maybe just a little bit less so that I can weld around the whole thing 100%. Before I weld that on, I need to make absolute sure that the 2-inch will slide into that piece of 2.5 inch. So we may have to do a little bit of machining to that so that it fits okay. So we're just gonna keep it simple. We're gonna cut this piece of 2.5 inch tube to 5.5 inches long so that we can weld all 4 sides. I think we are gonna have to be a little bit careful when we weld our pick and eye to the top of this because we don't want to warp this tube to the point where we can't slide our piece of 2-inch in and out of this. Now, this is not DOM. So inside here, hopefully you can see that seam in there. So this seam right here, I'm gonna have to grind that out. And I do have a super cool tool that's gonna help us with that. So we'll cut our tube first. We'll get it set over here, see how we like it. Maybe we'll get our 2-inch piece cut as well and start brainstorming how everything's gonna look. And then we'll come back to you. All right, so now we're going to take our band file. We're going to go ahead and grind this seam out so that our 2-inch piece slides in and out of this 2.5 inch piece nice and smooth. So we'll go ahead and get some safeties on. And get after it. Okay, so this is pretty dang tight. It's not fitting the way I want it to. So I think what we're going to see how durable this is. Still working, so that's good. So I think what we're gonna have to do is take a facing mill and machine this down on all 4 sides. Just take a little bit off. Because it needs to be able to slide in and out of here, and being stainless, we don't want it to gall. So it's gotta have some slop. So I think the next order of business is probably going to be getting this machined down to where it will slide in and out of that. So I'm thinking if we take 10 or 15 thousandths off each side, we should be good. It's really close that way. We're going to start with 10 thousandths. We're going to take 10 thousandths off all 4 sides, and then we'll see what it looks like. So let's go over to the mill. We'll get it all set up. We'll start taking a cut off this. All right, guys, so we've got an indexable 2-inch end mill here. You can see it's got those little carbide bits on it. This will take a cut that's 2 inches wide. And luckily, that's going to be just enough that we don't have to take more than one pass. So we'll be able to run one pass and flip it on all four sides. All right, guys, well, we finally got this rolling. For some reason, this end mill did not like the carbide bits that I had in it. They didn't have much of a radius, so I've switched over to something that has like a 30-second radius on them, and it's cutting like butter now. So I've also slowed my speed down, and it seems to be cutting a lot better. So we're gonna run it like this. I've got my power feed on, so it's just gonna run, and it's probably gonna take quite a while to get this done. So no point in putting you guys through it if you don't have to. So we'll come back to you once we have this all machined, and we'll give you guys a look. All right, guys, while that's machining, I'm gonna put this in the bandsaw and cut this at 5.5 inches. That's the size of piece that I want to cut for the mounting plate for our winch. So take this over there, we'll start cutting this. We got plenty of time. We're going to be waiting for that. All right, something else we can do while we're waiting for that to machine is lay out our hole pattern for our winch here. And for some reason, they didn't make it easy on us. It's not an easy measurement. For some reason, you would think that they would make it like 3 inches or 3 1/8 inches, but it's actually pretty much 3 3/32. So I'm not sure why they do stupid stuff like that. Okay, so once we get done with the mill, we'll go ahead and drill these holes. All right, guys, so we got our piece of tube machined here. We did get a little bit of chatter on a couple spots here, but it looks good. And I've checked it, and it does slide in nice and easy. There's a little bit of slop there, which we wanted, so happy with that. Okay, so now we're ready to take our mounting plate here. We're going to go over and drill these holes. So I'm going to drill the same size hole that's on the bottom of our winch here. And they look to be 3/8. They are 3/8. So we're going to take this plate, we'll go over to the mill, we'll drill our 3/8 holes in this, and then it'll be ready to weld it up. So let's go drill these. All right, so here's where we're at. Fit looks good, our holes line up good with our winch. So here's what I'm thinking. So if I take this plate and weld it to my 2-inch tube like so, when I slide it in, and then when it does, it will be flush on this back side. It will hit against the toe of the weld here. And then I'll have a hitch pin here. So I'm probably going to put a hitch pin dead center of this. But before I want to do that, I think I want to get this welded onto the 2-inch piece. The other thing we need to do is where these holes are, after I get that plate on, I'll go over to the mill and I'll punch through the rest of the hole through the 2-inch tube, and then that's where my bolts will mount the winch to this. Those bolts are actually going to run through the 1/2-inch plate and the 2-inch tube. So all that's left to do now is set up the welder and see if we can't get this welded on here. Alright guys, I've got some marks on this to center our holes in the center of our 2-inch tube. I'm going to go ahead and start with a couple tacks. I am using my big MK14 cup from Furic. Give us some good coverage. I like to use a larger cup when I'm welding stainless because it requires better coverage. So we'll go ahead and get some tacks on this, see if everything stays put. You'll notice I leave my cup over the tack after I get done to let the post flow on the welder continue to shield the weld until it's cooled. Okay, so we've got some good tacks on this. Check my marks. They look good. So we're gonna go ahead and get some weld on this. That's better. So here's our first pass with a number 8 cup. So we've got one pass on both sides. I'm going to get one pass on the back side now. We don't want to let this get too hot, so I'm going to weld and then I'll wait a minute, let it cool for a minute, and then I'll run a weld and then I'll wait a minute. So you guys aren't going to see this whole process, you'll just see bits and pieces of it. Alright, we're still just chipping away at this. It's a little time consuming because we don't want it to get too hot. Checking it with a square here, it's still warped a little bit, which I knew it was going to, but it's just the way it goes. You put that much heat into it, especially stainless, it's going to move. So it's not going to hurt anything. We'll still be able to mount it solid to this, and it should be strong enough that it's going to pull the boat if it needs to. If something's going to give, it's not going to be this. All right, so I want to show you guys what we got. So you can see I walked the cup on those sides. So I've got it all welded out, and I think it looks good. But you can see how much that's warped. That's typical for stainless. While it's hot, I'm going to go over to the press, and I'm going to put 2 pieces of tube or something underneath these sides, and then I'm going to press it down, and I'm just going to take a square and I'm going to check it. And I want to get it back to flat because obviously this surface right here is flat. So we need it to mate up against that. So while it's hot, I'm going to go over there and just see if I can press that and get that tweaked back to flat. We'll see how this goes. All right guys, good news. I did get this flat. Hopefully you can see, but I did get that plate flat. I've polished everything up. I think it looks good. Now that that's done, we can go back over to the mill and finish drilling these holes clear through. That way we can get bolts through it to mount the winch. So we'll go back over to the mill and we'll hurry and drill these. All right, guys, got my hardware here. Let's see if I can get this mounted on here. All right, guys, hardware's on. It's bolted to our hitch, so that part's done. We need to weld our coupler over on the boat. So we'll get the Dynasty set up over there. We'll figure out where exactly that's going to go and we'll start welding it. Let's go over there and see what we got. All right, guys, I did just remember I would like to weld the pick and eye that goes on the tube. I would like to weld that on the tube before we weld the tube to the boat. All right, guys, we got our part done here. Hopefully you guys could see me welding on that, but I was walking the cup. So I got my corners all wrapped here. Gotta love the color you get with stainless. So we'll go ahead and polish that up. Once we get that polished up, we'll go over to the front of the airboat and we'll get this welded on. Alright, guys, so I thought I had made a terrible mistake not drilling this first. I thought I was going to have to unbolt everything to put it in here, but luckily it still fits in here. We're going to be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this out now. And once I get that drilled, then all that's left is to weld our receiver piece on the front of the boat. So we'll go ahead and drill this now. Okay, now the moment of truth to see if it lines up. All right, guys, thank goodness. Fits like a glove. Okay, so now that everything fits there, I'm going to take this over and it's time to weld it to the boat. The last step. So let's go do that now. All right. We've got measurements pulled side to side, front to back. As long as it hasn't moved, it should still be where I want it. Okay, so I'm going to get some tacks on it. All right, guys, here's what we got. Here is our winch. Put that pin in. Okay, solid. Feel pretty good about that. We're gonna go ahead and hook this up to a battery so that we can reel this in, get the winch all rewound. But I like it. Pretty slick. They'll be able to keep this under their boat seat. If they get in a situation where they need to get pulled out or pull themselves out, they can use that. I'll bring you guys in close here and give you guys a look. Pretty happy with how it turned out. You can see the plate did start to warp just a little bit, but we discussed that. Me and the customer, he was good with it because he knew it was probably going to happen. So I do like the way it turned out. I like the way it looks. I don't feel like it's too gaudy. So I think that wraps up another one. Appreciate you guys watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. This one here was a little bit different because I think one of the most important things about a project like this is order of operations. You got to make sure that you do the right thing at the right time. And there was a couple times there where we almost screwed up. So knowing when to drill the hole first and when to weld it first and all that stuff just makes a project like this a lot easier and more successful. So thanks for watching. See you on the next one. To where we could mount something on this plate to mount. So the customer got a hold of me and had me, what the hell am I trying to say here? So our project for tonight is I'm gonna run it really hot and really heavy. Hot and heavy. We need to burn like a pick and eye and weld it on top of our 2.5 inch tube so that there's somewhere for it is a, and that will, so we'll have to drill the